women are hypergamous by nature. That means they have to see you as better than them in some way. That's why women, like a high-powered female attorney, will never marry a barista at Starbucks. So we talked about handling shit tests, learning how to be more assertive, learning how to set boundaries and enforcing boundaries, and putting your foot down when you need to. All that kind of stuff builds healthy emotional anticipation and intention. I call it heat.
You're a man living in the modern world in a time when men and manhood are not what they once were. You live life on your own terms. You're self-sufficient. You think for yourself and you march to the beat of your own drum. When life knocks you down, you get back up because in your gut, you know that's what men do. You're a badass and a warrior. And on the days when you forget, we are here to remind you who you really are.
Well, let me give you guys my Batman origin story, because I think it's important to understand how I got into this space. Because like I said, I was in the Navy, and I was always that kind of guy that was sniper dating, right? You see one girl, she's slightly nice to you, and you go all in on her, and you're like, I'm going to marry this girl, right? You get Twitter pated with every girl that's slightly nice to you and touches your dick. And so that was me. And I was always pretty good with women back in high school, and lost my virginity at 16, that sort of thing. But I always had that sniper mentality, and I was always running for that white picket fence, right? I'm going to get married. I'm going to marry this girl. Well, I had a whole bunch of little flings until I joined the Navy. And my second year in the Navy, I met my now ex-wife. And my now ex-wife, I met her. I went home on leave, and we were, she lived in Colorado. I was stationed in California. And so we met, and we spent the whole week together, didn't hook up at all, but, exchanged numbers. And then I spent the whole next 9 months or so emailing back and forth, calling her on phones. My first cell phone I got because I had to call her every day, that sort of simpy thing. And I convinced her to move out to San Diego with me. And she and I got an apartment. And so face-to-face time, we probably knew each other about 3 solid months worth of face-to-face time before I decided that I was going to do the right thing and be a real man. And I was going to marry this girl and make sure that she was taken care of, because that's what men do. And I was also going on deployment. I was going to go on a 6-month, a 3-month training exercise, come back for a little bit, and then go on a 6-month training exercise. So that first year we were married, we were only together a couple months, and we eloped. We told our parents that we were going to get married, but we wanted to just do a justice of the peace wedding. But both sets of parents insisted on coming down to San Diego, so we told them, we're not going to do it, but we went and did it anyway. So that was the start of bad decision making. Well, a couple of years later, after the military, we're still doing pretty good. But then we have our first kid. We have our daughter, and then a couple of years after that, we had some rocky situations, but not too bad. I would say probably on a scale of 1 to 5, where 5 is a totally horrendous situation. We were probably around a 3 most of the time, and then we had my son, and then we moved into our first house, and it was like right around that time when we moved into that house that everything went downhill. Like everything, I would say the last half of my marriage, the last 7 years of my marriage was just absolute misery. It was, there was times where I just didn't like her very much. So I would go get a cot out of the garage and go sleep in my office. And just so I didn't have to be around her. I'd work 17-hour days just to avoid her, because I knew that when I came home, I was just going to get an earful. You know how I don't know about you guys, but a lot of guys experience this where they know that their wife's just going to unload on them when they get home. So they come home and they just sit in their car for 15 minutes, just trying to get their mind right. Like, okay, what kind of fucking bullshit is she going to dump in my lap when I walk in that door after you spent, 12, 13-hour days putting out fires at work, right? Well, that was my life for a long time. I gained a lot of weight. I was doing I was drinking a lot of alcohol, just trying to cope with the situation. But I was the kind of guy that I would have never quit. I would never quit that relationship. You know, my parents are still together. They're miserable, but they're still together. My grandparents never got divorced. And I was like, no, I've made vows. This is life. Like, this is just how life's supposed to be. You're supposed to be in this miserable situation and suck it up. Well, in 2019, we ended up moving back to Colorado. No, sorry, 2013. We moved back to Colorado. And this was actually a part of her exit strategy. And one of the things that we've sort of learned about women is that a lot of women will check out mentally from a relationship up to 2 years before they're ready to pull that trigger. Oh, okay. Richmond says 5 years, but you know, on average, right? And so they will pull that trigger, and they'll basically be mentally checked out from the relationship. And what a lot of women do is they start looking for their orbiters. You know, they're trying to line up guys. That's why a lot of guys, when they go through a divorce, their wife ends up with another guy almost immediately. And they're like, what the hell happened? We just broke up. How can you be with another guy already? Well, it's because that guy's been around. You know, she might not have been cheating on you at the end, but usually there's already a guy in the picture that she's got lined up when she's ready to drop that brick in your lap. Well, find myself, this is back in 2014 is when she filed. And I find myself back on the dating circuit. Haven't been on a date in 15 years. I'm 50 pounds overweight. I'm just floundering. I have no idea what I'm doing. The dating apps were new. You know, back when I met my wife, there was no dating apps. You would meet people through social circles or a cold approach, you know, going to the mall, cruising for chicks or something. But these dating apps were a whole new thing. I had no idea what I was doing. And I just floundered around on the dating circuit. I would get dates, but I was too much of a pussy to make a move. You know, I was all like, oh, I basically wanted a handwritten invitation before going in for even something simple like a kiss, you know? So I just sucked. I sucked so bad until about 11 months in. And I met my, a girl that I call Red Pill Chick on my podcast. I met Red Pill Chick near the end of 2014, and she was a little bit of a chubby chaser. She was nice to me, and just like my previous history, any girl that's nice to me, I'm going all in, right? I put the blinders on. I'm overlooking red flags, and I go all in. Well, luckily for me, I ended up losing weight. You know, the first year of that relationship, I finally decided to take my health back. Started losing a lot of weight. I ended up getting in really good shape, and then. But I fell back on old habits. I thought I reached the finish line. Each relationship I got into, I thought I reached the finish line. And so luckily, my patterns started to emerge pretty much immediately, because I basically immediately fell into the same patterns that I was already in with my my ex-wife. And so that really started turning this chick off. And so about 2 years into that relationship, she checked it out. And so we stayed together for another 2.5 years after that. But she was just going through the motions, and I thought everything was great. You know, this is a perfect situation. I'm happy. You know, I see her every day. I'm not really trying anymore. I'm not really trying to seduce her anymore. It's just like, hey, you want to go to bed? You want to fool around kind of thing. And well, she ended up cheating on me. She ended up lining up her orbiters. You know, I would say last 6 months of that relationship, she started hanging out with like dudes at work more often. She was like, I don't want you coming down to my house. I'm busy. And like one of the last times I went down to her house, I always kept stuff there. I kept the dog bed there because I have a dog, and I would bring it down. Well, one day I go down there, the dog bed's put away. My toothbrush is hidden in her drawer. And I'm like, what is going on? This doesn't make sense. And oh, by the way, my coworker, this guy, he brought over a ladder the other day and helped me paint my bedroom. Oh, he did. Okay. That was very nice of him, you know, kind of thing. Well, after she started pushing me away so much that I finally broke up with her. Right. And it just no clue of what was really happening. She ended up with this guy, you know, she ended up in a relationship with that guy for about 1.5 years. And so I found myself back on the dating circuit again. This is 2019. And I'm getting dates really easily, but I can't keep chicks around more than like 3 dates. I'm like repelling women. And I'm like, what the fuck am I doing wrong here? The 2 biggest relationships in my life have failed. I can't keep women around more than 3 dates. I'm the problem. Like, I'm the common denominator here. What the fuck can I do? And so I took a deep dive in intersexual dynamics. I read probably 100 different books. Some of them I've read like 25 times. And I was just like on repeat. I was like, I'm going to fucking figure this out. I'm going to be the Bob Proctor of women, right? And I don't know if you guys know who Bob Proctor is, but he read Think and Grow Rich for 60 years straight, right? So I'm like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to read this shit for the rest of my life. I'm going to start a podcast, so it's always in the forefront of my mind. So I'm always learning this stuff. So started the podcast. I joined a men's group very similar to this, but it was on Facebook, and we were swapping notes about women, like what worked, what didn't. And out of that group, I started my podcast, and then out of the podcast, I started working with some of the bigger names in the space. A lot of people haven't heard of these guys because it's very niche, but guys like Rollo Tomasi, he wrote the Rational Male series, Rich Cooper, Dr. Robert Glover, like a bunch of the popular names in the men's self-help space. They all came on my show. I started working with Rollo Tomasi. He invited me on his Saturday show called Rule Zero. And so I still do that. In fact, I'm hosting this Saturday. But I started doing that, and I started working with men. I started coaching men on this situation. And I really found fulfillment in helping men who were married, because one of the big problems with the red pill space is we're always, pounding our fist that men shouldn't get married. Don't get married. It's not worth it. The juice isn't worth the squeeze. The marriage laws are unfavorable to men. It makes no sense getting the government in your relationship. But what about the men who are already in relationships? What about the men who are already married? Well, there's a subgroup of red pill called the married red pill. And it's guys who started taking this stuff because they were in dead bedroom situations. They're found this space because they're looking up, how do I get my wife to fuck me again? And they found groups like on Reddit that applied the information that we've learned in red pill and the science of attraction and evolutionary psychology to understand how women work. And we started using this to actually fix marriages. So it's actually pretty fascinating. So with all that being said, guys, let's get into it. Let's see here. There we go. So we're going to talk about today, pretty simple. We're talking about what's called the betatization process. And that refers to a psychological state impacting perceived value in romantic relationships, right? You guys get the concept of alpha beta, right? Like alpha is like top dog and beta is like a pussy pushover kind of guy. We're going to talk about the neurochemistry impact of alpha versus beta. A lot of people don't like the terms alpha and beta. In fact, if you talk about it at all online, there's always some fucking nerd that comes in the comments saying, well, there was a wolf study one time that says that wolves aren't really alphas and whatever. It doesn't matter. It totally doesn't matter. It's a container word. People know when a guy has a dominant masculine presence. Women know who they want to fuck. Like alpha's a real thing. Beta, are guys that are pushovers that women don't want to fuck. You can call it whatever you want. Alpha and beta just happens to be an easy, sort of terminology to use. But there is a neurochemical impact to these types of traits, right? And then we're going to talk about a concept called dread game, or, which sounds terrible, but it actually will break women out of their complacency, because women get into a state after the betatization process where they're complacent too. Like they don't think they have to try anymore. So they don't. And their biggest agency, especially in a relationship, is their sexuality. And so they sort of use that as a bargaining chip and manipulation tool, right? All right. So the betatization process, this is basically what it is, right? So they attract the alpha type guy. They find a guy, they find him sexually attractive. It starts when a woman attracts what they would consider a high value man, right? And that's subjective. What one woman might consider a high value man, it has nothing really to do with money. A lot of it has to do with potential, right? They see something in this guy. They see that he's a go-getter. Like he might be working at McDonald's, but and right now he's mopping the floors, but next week is the fries, baby. And so she sees potential in him. She thinks he's an alpha male. So it's completely subjective based on how a woman perceives a guy, right? That's why a lot of guys they'll break up with their girlfriend and she'll be with some loser, right? And they're like, why is she with that fucking loser? Well, to her, he's some kind of fucking alpha male. He's got a throat tattoo. He's cool, So they attract an alpha guy, right? Then what women try to do is they're trying to secure resources and protection. This is all evolutionary psychology. This is a women's survival mechanism that's been bred into them through generations, right? But when she gets a guy, she wants to lock him down Secure his resources, his attention, and protection to ensure the safety of herself and her children. Because, 500 years ago, women had nothing. They needed men to protect them and stuff, right? So it makes sense. Then there's this gradual shift from this alpha dominant male guy to a beta provider, right? So over time, she secures more of his resources, commitment, begins to test and challenge him. And then when he doesn't handle it properly, she basically loses respect for him, starts henpecking him and stuff like that. And then he's just trying to keep the peace. You ever hear guys say, I just want peace. Like, when I get home, I just want a girl that brings me peace. Women will never bring you peace. And then because they've beta-tized you, now that sexual attraction dries up, right? They've basically taken this guy that they think is fucking sexy. They're banging his brains out on a daily basis, and they turn him into a weak guy that they just lose all attraction for. Okay. And then the cycle repeats itself. When they either cheat on that guy or they go out and dump him outright and go find another guy, the process repeats itself. So how it works, right? It starts off by them testing you. We call these shit tests, right? So women will test you. All women test men either consciously or subconsciously. And some women test more than others, but they all do it at some level. I have a friend, another friend in the space. He doesn't teach this stuff. He's just one of the guys that just applies it in his life and uses it in his relationships. But he said something profound to me one time. He goes, it's not a test until you fail it. He goes, because if you pass the test, she just thinks everything's normal. She thinks everything's cool. She maintains that attraction for you, and she's just happy that you handled it right. Right. But as soon as you fail it, she fucking knows. Now it's a test. Right. So they start testing guys, and most guys have no clue how to handle this stuff. One of the things that I've learned from Dr. Robert Glover is the concept of deering, right? Defend, explain, excuse, rationalize. A lot of guys, when a woman criticizes them, they'll start explaining themselves. Well, I'm only doing it because of this. And, they're trying to justify whatever it is they're doing. That puts them at a one down position from her mentally. She's now the arbiter of what's good and bad in what you're doing. And now she starts losing respect for you. And the thing about what we're going to talk about a little bit is women are hypergamous by nature. That means they have to see you as better than them in some way. That's why women, like a high-powered female attorney, will never marry a barista at Starbucks. So they test you, and when you fail it, then what the next thing they try to do is they try to seek communication. How many times do you have a woman say, hey, be vulnerable with me? I just want to connect. Why don't you talk about your feelings more? You ever get that? It's a fucking trap. It's a trap. And it's basically something that's pushed by our society, right? Be vulnerable. It's okay for men to be vulnerable. It is okay for men to be vulnerable, especially in groups like this. It's very good for men to connect with other men because men solve problems, right? And men are very solution oriented. So if we have problems and we have a group of guys to go to, it's so good for us. It's so healthy for us. So it's awesome that you guys have this group. But what a lot of guys don't have a group like this. So they also don't have any friends. How many guys have no friends outside of their marriage or their relationship? Or they did have friends and then they got into a relationship and then they stopped hanging out with their buddies and they only hang out with her, right? That's like 99% of dudes, right? So what happens is guys have no one else to go to. She's his best friend. So he just dumps all of his problems and his emotions. He starts crying and all that kind of stuff. All that kind of stuff, women will bless their hearts, right? They'll say they want that. They might even think that they want that. But when you do it, they lose attraction. They lose attraction because they need to see you as their rock. It doesn't work the other way around, unfortunately. Now, we're humans. We're humans, right? So it's terrible to tell guys this and then say, well, you have no outlet, right? Well, you do have an outlet. You have a group like this, but you're going to slip, right? We have feelings. We're not fucking robots, right? So you're occasionally going to, tell your girl that you had a shit day. But the key to handling that is adding a solution to the end of it, right? So let's say you have a terrible day, your coworkers aren't acting right or whatever, and you find yourself telling her all this stuff. At the end of that, go, but you know what? Everything's going to be handled tomorrow morning. I got a plan. I'm going to go talk to so-and-so. We're going to get this wrapped up, and then put a positive spin on that shit at the end. You're going to be fine, right? But if you ask any woman and they're honest about it, they'll say, yeah, I mean, I care about his problems, but if he can't fix his shit, like what kind of man is he? Right. So women, they start looking at you as weak when you can't solve your own problems. And that's really where the seeking communication part becomes an issue. The next thing they'll do is they'll make you, they'll put you to work. They'll make you a dutiful plow horse. That's why when you go to marriage counseling and they bring up the fucking love languages, and they say, okay, what are your love languages? And she's like, well, it would be really great if he cleaned the gutters around the house. Right. It would be great if he helped me with the dishes sometimes. So guys are like, oh, okay, yeah, whatever gets me sex. So they'll go and clean the gutters and wash the dishes. And they'll be like, oh, hey, honey, I cleaned the gutters and washed the dishes for you. Now can I have sex? It becomes a negotiation for desire. And you can't negotiate genuine desire. And so when she sees you doing this kind of shit, it does nothing for attraction, right? She's like, thanks, thanks for doing that, but it doesn't do anything to get her vagina wet, right? So that's one of the reasons why love languages don't really work. Like they're kind of nice, right? Like if you do this kind of stuff from the beginning, just because you are serving your girl and, she's doing this kind of stuff back, that does make for a healthy relationship. But to try to do that kind of stuff to fix a relationship doesn't work. So then evolutionary selfishness kicks in, right? So her focus now shifts entirely to her own needs. She's lost attraction for you. She doesn't respect you anymore. Now she's going to start manipulating you just to secure her emotional, material priorities and stuff like that. And that's where self-determination comes in. Self-determination is where women will either cheat or file for divorce, right? This is where she sees, okay, I've beta-tized him to a point where I've just lost all attraction for him. This isn't working out for me. And now there's a 50% divorce rate and 80% of those divorces are filed by women. So how do you recognize it, right? Well, it's pretty easy. You start noticing that she just doesn't respect you anymore, right? You tell her, hey, honey, I don't appreciate you doing that. And she just laughs it off and does it anyway, because she doesn't respect your boundaries, right? Stuff like that. She starts just nitpicking everything you're doing all the time. Everything she's becomes an insufferable bitch, right? She's just complaining about everything you do. All that kind of stuff becomes is pretty apparent. It's basically a warning sign. But what most guys do is they almost sort of accept that as reality, right? Like this is just what women do. You've been in a relationship for a long time. She's an irritable bitch and she nags me all the time. That's my mom did that to my dad. So this is a normal part of a relationship. So we have these paradigms growing up based on what happened with our parents. And we think, oh, this is just normal. It's not fucking normal. If she's doing this kind of stuff, she's disrespecting you. She's undermining your authority with the kids. She's nagging you all the time. All this kind of stuff. These should be like warning signals for you. Like, oh shit, something's fucking off. I need some help here. I need to call Paul. I need to call Bauer, or I need to do something. I need to tune into his podcast at least, right? I need to start figuring out what the fuck's going on here. But most guys don't do that. They're completely oblivious. And that leads us to the three different archetypes that we typically see in a marriage situation that's basically on the rocks, right? So a healthy dynamic that we like to advocate for is more of like and I'm a Navy guy, right? Is a captain, executive officer type relationship with your girl. It's not an equal partnership. A lot of guys are like, oh, she's my partner. She's my best friend. She's my partner or whatever. The problem with that paradigm is that if you look at her like she's your equal, typically you start deferring to her. You don't want to make a decision without consulting with your equal partner, right? So you won't go and do things without getting her buy-in first. Well, now that makes her the decider. She's not even equal at that point. Now she's the decider. She's above you. And like I said, she has to see you as above her in some way. And so that's eroding attraction, right? So what ends up happening is if you're looking at the captain executive officer dynamic as the goal where you're in charge, like the captain is in charge of the ship. He's in charge of the overall mission of the ship. Now, as executive officer's there to support him, and it's a leadership role too, right? So the other sailors on the ship, like let's say your kids, they have to listen to the executive officer. The executive officer has a lot of power in the relationship. And executive officers are pretty smart. There's no reason not to take what your executive officer suggests under advisement. But at the end of the day, you're the decider, you're the leader, you're setting the tone, you're leading the mission, right? So that's the healthiest basically dynamic you'll ever get to. So what happens is a lot of relationships sort of start off that way, but after the betatization process, it usually lands in one of three areas, right? So we have the drunken captain and his begrudging first officer. This is a type 1 captain. This man, he's reactive, he's inconsistent, he's undisciplined, his leadership's completely unreliable, and his wife or executive officer ends up stepping up to pick up the slack, right? But she's doing all the shit that she feels you should be doing. Big example of this is finances. How many guys, once they get married, they just turn over the purse string to the wife and say, you handle everything, you pay the bills, and I'll just bring home the bacon, right? That's a situation where most women really don't want to be in, unless they're some kind of accountant major or something at college, right? But most women don't really want that responsibility. So now that she's doing these jobs that she feels you should be doing, and now she's building up resentment, right? And then you have the neurotic captain and his constantly complaining first officer. Now, these guys are challenging, right? Because these guys, they're riddled with self-doubt, indecision. They overthink everything they do. They can't make a decision for shit. They have to look at like 15 reviews before, pulling the trigger on buying a toothbrush. And so, getting these guys on a call, it's a challenge because one of the things that makes a guy very attractive and sort of dominant and alpha or whatever in women's eyes is a guy who's decisive, a guy who can make decisions quickly. Napoleon Hill says that successful men make decisions quickly and change their minds rarely, if ever. And so these guys are the complete opposite of that. They can't make a decision for shit. So just because they don't have the confidence to trust their gut, right? Well, that leads to resentment and loss of respect too. And then we have the captain and her husband, right? So this is a type 3 captain. This is where the guy has completely let go of a relationship. His wife has taken over. She's basically mutinied the ship, and now she's the captain. And she's running everything. I'm sure you guys know people like this. My ex-wife's aunt was like this. Just a complete ball-busting woman, alpha bitch, right? Just boss woman. Her husband just let her do everything, just walked all over him. It was sad to watch, right? So that's the third dynamic. But the thing is that even the most boss bitch of women, right? The most, successful female attorneys, out there, the female CEOs, the last thing they want when they come home is to have to make decisions in the relationship. And so they tend to resent men who do that too. So let's talk about these alpha and beta traits a little bit. So I have here, sprinkle a little beta on it. We'll get to that. So basically, the neurochemical reaction to women for guys who show what they call alpha traits, right? So dominant, like I said, decisive, they're masculine, they're confident, chest out, shoulders back. They take up a lot of space. Women can't get their way with them. They handle shit tests like a pro. Like these guys have these alpha traits, right? Well, those traits create a dopamine spike in women, right? And dopamine, if you guys know anything about it, it's very addicting. I mean, just if you're stuck all day playing on TikTok, it's because of the dopamine addiction, right? Well, women get their dopamine addiction from these alpha traits in men. But they also want security, right? A lot of guys look at money. They think women only care about money, right? How many of you guys have thought about, all women only really want me for my money? Well, they do if you start off that way, but money doesn't make them sexually attracted because actually that's a beta trait, right? Being a good provider, being a good husband, being a good father, being a nurturer, being a kind, like your wife has her period, so you go to the store and bring her chocolates. That's a beta type action. You're showing her comfort love, right? So that releases oxytocin for her. She feels comfortable. She feels like, oh man, this guy really loves me. This is where if you ask a woman anything about relationship advice or dating advice, this is what they describe. Women can't describe a relationship from anything other than the comfort aspect. That's why a lot of guys lead with the beta qualities and get confused why she's fucking some guy with a throat tattoo in a Waffle House parking lot, right? Because that doesn't make her sexually attractive. She likes that stuff. She feels comfort in that, but it doesn't make her sexually attracted, right? So if you're going to be in a long-term relationship, you have to understand this dynamic in women's brains, right? They need both. They need a guy who sets the tone and leads the relationship, that's dominant, has a dominant masculine presence, that they find sexually attractive. They like guys that are in shape. They like guys that, take their health seriously in that regards. They like a guy that they can't get their way with. Those are all sort of alpha dominant traits that they find sexually appealing. But if you're going to keep her around in the long term, you have to, what we say is sprinkle a little beta on it. You've got to at least have 20% of these beta traits in order to maintain that traction in the long term, but also keep out of a dead bedroom, right? So you have to optimize the alpha traits if you want to stay out of a dead bedroom. And so one of the things that we say in the space, right? You can't sprinkle a little alpha on it. It doesn't work. It only works the other way around. So how do we fix this? So this picture here is Rollo Tomasi. He's the author of the Rational Male book series, widely regarded as the godfather of the red pill. A guy named Pat Campbell gave him that moniker. He didn't give it to himself, if you guys were wondering. And that's his wife. A lot of people don't realize this because if they've ever read Rollo's books or they ever hear his podcast, they think that he hates women. Which he totally doesn't. It's just like sound bites and like selective hearing, but he doesn't. And that's his wife. And he's been married to her for 28 years and he's been applying these principles and they have a very happy relationship. But one of his sort of mantras is what he calls the cardinal rule of relationships. And that is, and it works in business relationships. It works in your friendships. It works in your romantic relationships, but in any relationship, the person with the power is the one who needs the other person the least, right? So we have this sort of mental model, right, where you are sort of ready to leave at any given moment, like the movie Heat, as soon as you smell the heat coming around the corner, you're going to walk out within 30 seconds or something, right? So that's almost a helpful mental model to stay lovingly detached in a relationship. And I say lovingly detached, it's something I learned from Dr. Robert Glover. But what happens is a lot of men get so Twitter-pated in the relationship that they can't look at things from a rational perspective. They can't maintain their frame. They can't identify shit tests as they're coming, and so they just sort of end up being reactionary, and they're sort of, and men are idealists anyway. We're the ones that love the idea of love, and women are really more opportunistic. So men really have a hard time with this. But if you can stay lovingly detached and use some of these mental models to do that, you can actually lead a healthy relationship. You still love your wife or your girlfriend, but you could do it more strategically. So we're going to introduce a concept here called passive dread. Now there's a concept called active dread too. There's a really good book. It's one of my what I call holy trinity of books. It's called Atomic Attraction by Christopher Canwell. And he has a whole chapter on dread, and it's fucking awful. It's terrible. He starts talking about how if you're having problems in your relationship, go to Macy's and go to the perfume counter and spray woman's perfume on you, and then come home and let her smell that shit, right? That's toxic as fuck, right? That's the idea of toxic dread. It's basically to actively try to induce competition anxiety in your wife by doing manipulative bullshit. Totally unnecessary to do that kind of stuff. In fact, it'll probably hurt your relationship more than anything. Okay. But passive dread is something where you're doing it without even trying. Right. So one of the things that we do is you basically are leveling yourself up so much that you are a naturally attractive guy. Right. You work on your muscles, you work on your money, you work on your game, you work on your frame. And other people start seeing this stuff. Other people can see when you work on being more social. Right. You go out, you start having a friends circle again. When your wife goes out with you, she sees the other women checking you out. Women will notice other women checking you out way more than you will notice it, because women are always having that they have their radar up for that kind of thing. And so passive dread is sort of the act of just being a naturally charismatic, attractive guy. Okay. It's not even a bad thing. But the reason why it works is because you're now optimizing your alpha traits. You're optimizing your sexual attractiveness. Okay. Doing these things, working on the things that we talk about, we call them the core four, but the muscles, money, game, and frame. That's all that stuff really increases your sexual attractiveness, right? And what it does is it reintroduces competition anxiety. Now, a big reason why women stop trying in a relationship too is because of the loss of competition anxiety. When you're out on the dating circuit, and you're dating efficiently, and I say dating efficiently, I mean you're actually seeing multiple women at once, right? You don't have to be sleeping with all of them, but you're at least talking to multiple women. We call this spinning plates. Women call it dating. This is how women naturally date. They are talking to multiple guys at once, and they are weighing their best possible option. But most men don't do that. Most men talk to one girl at a time. They're immediately exclusive, and they go the sniper route, which I was talking about at the beginning. Well, if you're like guys who are naturally attractive to women typically spin plates, right? They date multiple women at once, and women actually find that one, more attractive, and it also brings up competition anxiety in them, which makes them want to try harder. Women are very competitive. It reintroduces a concept of pre-selection. Pre-selection is a psychological, it's a psychological phenomenon where women find men who other women like attractive. It's one of the reasons why if you go to a bar with a wedding ring on, you're like 9 times more likely to get a date because women look for that wedding ring and they're immediately attracted to that because they're like, oh, if another woman chose him, he must be a good catch. It's a psychological shortcut that women do to try to pick mates. It comes from their evolutionary psychology because, you know, if they can't figure out these shortcuts, well, now it takes a lot of time, months, sometimes years to figure out if you're a good guy. But if other women already like you, oh, he must be a good guy. So it reintroduces pre-selection. I sort of skipped over it, but one of the reasons why women stop trying in after they get married is they don't see other women as a threat anymore. So they stop trying, right? They lose that competition anxiety. So if you reintroduce that, now they typically are snapped out of their complacency and they want to start trying again, right? This also reestablishes your sexual market value and you end up becoming the prize. So I have this picture here of this guy and this hot waitress bending over showing her cleavage. Now, fun fact about women, they don't just bend over and show you their cleavage and they're completely unaware of it. If a woman's leaning over to show you her cleavage, she's trying to get you to notice that, right? Well, women notice this shit too. And so you know it's passive dread when you're at a restaurant with your wife and the waitress starts flirting with you, right? And you're just a social person. You're not actually flirting back. You're just being, kind and respectful and talking to her, right? And then when your wife goes, hey, what was that all about? And you just laugh it off and be like, what about, right? She goes, oh, she was hitting on you. Oh, was she? Well, why wouldn't she? But most guys don't do that. Most guys are like, what? Oh, well, I would never, right? Which they try to alleviate that competition anxiety. Well, that competition anxiety actually boosts attraction. So you don't want to dissuade it. You just want to playfully, tease her about it, right? So how are we going to implement this stuff? Well, we have a process called the MAP, the male action plan. This is something I learned from a guy named Athol Kay, wrote a phenomenal book called The Married Man's Sex Life Primer 2011. And he came up with this plan that fucking works. Guys over, a huge swath of time have applied this, swapped notes in forums, and it really talked about how it worked. And I would venture to say it has a 90% success rate. But basically what you're doing is you're just engaging in self-improvement, right? You're working on leveling up money, muscles, game, and frame. And when I say money, like a lot of guys are wealthy, right? And so they make good money, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about they sort of take back control of their finances. If they let their wife, run the purse string, they take it back and they say, no, I'm going to own this. I'm going to give my wife an allowance. I'm not going to make millions of dollars and have her give me a fucking allowance, right? So they take back control of that stuff. That, or if they're not doing so well financially, they go back to school. They start learning a trade or something. They start getting a degree, some kind of marketable skill, and they start making more money, right? They work with Nikki. They work with Nikki, start making more money. And then you start maintaining your independence again. You start, one thing that's really healthy in a relationship is guys having a good circle of other guys. I will sing that from the rooftop. That's why I think this group is phenomenal. But most guys don't have that, right? But if you go out and you have guy friends that you hang out with weekly or whatever, you have a bowling night, you go out without her, separate from her, you're not doing anything, you shouldn't be doing, but you're going out, you're having a social life again. Women actually find that attractive. We call that social proof. It's very similar to pre-selection, but basically women like guys that have a good circle of friends, but most guys let that all go and they go, they think that their wife wants their full attention and she doesn't. And so that actually creates a little bit of space in the relationship, and attraction grows in space and it dies in close proximity. So going out, maintaining your independence, doing things outside the relationship actually builds that attraction. And then attraction through challenge, right? So we talked about handling shit tests. So learning how to handle shit tests, learning how to be more assertive, learning how to set boundaries and enforcing boundaries, and putting your foot down when you need to. All that kind of stuff builds healthy emotional anticipation and intention. I call it heat. But a lot of guys are doing everything they possibly can to squash any type of tension in their relationship because they're trying to get their peace or whatever. Well, that seeking of peace kills the attraction. It kills all the tension. And women need to feel something. Women are very emotional beings. They need to at least feel something. And for them, if they're mad, if they're fucking anxious, if they have a lot of anxiety, if they're happy, all of that's good. That's all good for them. They're feeling something and you're evoking some kind of emotion in them that actually builds attraction. The worst possible thing a guy can do is get to a point where his wife is completely indifferent to him, where she's not testing him anymore. She basically, everything's robotic. It's like she's just going through the motions. If you're talking about the kids, she's like, yeah, pick them up at 5, and then otherwise wants nothing to do with you. It's the worst possible place for a guy to be in because she's lost all attraction. If you're going to turn that around, you have to get her feeling again, right? In some way, even if it's to piss her off. The role of self-improvement, we talked about this a little bit. Money, muscles, game, and frame. Basically, physical fitness boosts your confidence and appeal. There's lots of benefits for just getting in good shape. And one of the things that people complain about online a lot is how women only go for the top, 5 or 10% of guys. And a lot of guys use that as an excuse to give up completely. And I say, well, if you're just not fat in America, you're already in the top 25% of guys. Because we have an obesity problem here, right? We have, 75%, maybe even 80% of people in America are obese now. It's pretty bad. So if you're just not, you're already in the top 25% of men. So if you now work on your game and frame, you can easily get into the top 10%. There's no reason why you can't be the best guy in your area, So it's actually pretty easy. Money, you talk to Nikki about that. And then game, right? Game is the art of playful bantering, charm, charisma, seduction. Most guys, when they're married, stop the seduction completely. It becomes routine, right? It's Tuesday night. It's time to fool around, right? It's 10 o'clock. It's time to go to bed. It's fool around time, right? No, like you gotta do stuff that keeps that spark alive. I'm going to have a podcast episode on Monday. It's called Why. It's going to be 10 or 20 reasons why you should bang your girl in the back of your truck occasionally. Just to keep her guessing, right? Because that routine sort of action becomes boring, and you can be anything to a woman, but you can't be boring. And then frame is an interesting concept, but basically you want to cultivate mental toughness. You want to get to a place where you're not so emotionally reactive. And that's hard for men, right? We sort of default to anger. If our girl's like getting on our nerves, we want to yell at her and tell her, hey, fuck off, right? Like, leave me alone, right? And you start yelling, you start defending, all this kind of stuff. Well, that emotional reaction you just failed a shit test, right? So if you can learn how to not emotionally react to her nonsense, another good mental model we have in the space is to look at your girl like she's the most responsible teenager in the house, right? All this stuff sounds fucking awful, right? It sounds toxic as hell, but it's super helpful. Because if you think about this, right? If you have, let's say, a teenage niece, right? And she's sort of acting up, like you're probably not going to yell at her. You're probably going to look at her like she's a goofy bastard and you're going to tease her a little bit, right? Like, hey, chill out, you know? So if you treat your wife the same way when she's acting all emotional and you don't really take it seriously and she knows that her emotions aren't able to, you know, manipulate you, she might get pissed off at first, maybe for 30 minutes or so. But if you hold your ground and you're just not swayed by it, she's going to come over and curl up in your lap like a fucking cat. It's fascinating to watch. But I like to say women don't want to win, right? They'll test you. They might even get mad and stuff like that, but they don't want to win. They actually build more attraction and respect for you when they can't get their way with you. It's fascinating to watch. So avoiding common pitfalls, the biggest thing is guys start failing shit tests. When you start working on this stuff and your girl starts seeing your changes, she's not going to trust those changes. She's seen all your bullshit for the last 10 or 15 years, right? So you start doing all this stuff. She's like, yeah, whatever, this isn't the real you. And so she'll start testing you more. Well, if guys can't handle those tests, they start falling back on old patterns, right? And so they'll start falling back and they'll lose that respect. Another thing that guys do is they really are focusing on changing the wife, right? Every guy that comes to me first is always like, okay, my wife's doing this, my wife's doing that. I need her to do this. I need her to fuck me more. I need her to stop being a bitch, like all this kind of stuff. They're focusing on her. You can't change other people. You can only change yourself, right? So the hard part for men is taking the focus off their wife and focusing on themselves, making themselves their own mental point of origin. Because if you're focusing on your wife, if you can't tell me about the relationship without referring to her in every sentence, you're operating in her frame. You cannot see the relationship from your point of view. You're only seeing it from her point of view and what she's doing to you. And that's weak. That's weak behavior. It's unattractive behavior. So the hard part is to get guys to shift the focus back on themselves. Right. And then what they end up doing is they try to do all this stuff in order to get their wife to bang them again. Right. That ends up being a covert contract, which is something that nice guys do. It's where you're doing something to get something, but you're not telling the other person about it. And that builds up resentment because when you're not getting it, you start building up that resentment. It's completely unhealthy behavior. So you have to not focus on her. And it's one of the hardest things for guys to do. You can't focus on her. You only focus on leveling yourself up, right? And then falling back on old programming. This is the number one thing I see guys do too. They'll read all the books. They'll apply all the tactics. They'll do everything until they get to what they perceive as an end state. Their wife's fucking them again. Okay, cool. Now I can stop trying again, right? And so they fall back on this old programming where they go back to their old patterns and they stop doing the stuff that made her attractive in the first place. Same thing that happened when you first got into a relationship with her. You're doing all this attractive stuff she likes, and then you started being betatized, right? So what I like to tell guys is that the work never stops. There's no finish line. There's no end state. You always have to keep working on the stuff. It's a never ending game. If you want to be married, it's going to require this kind of work. But the cool thing about it is that if you do it enough, just like anything, it becomes a habit. And once it becomes a habit, it becomes something you do without even thinking about it. And so then you become the game, right? That's one of the things that we strive to tell guys. You have to eventually become the game. And that's where you're just doing it without even thinking about it. So summary, key takeaways. We talked about the betatization process. This is like the biggest reason why women lose attraction over time. They basically find the alpha guy, they turn him into a weak beta guy, and then they leave him. The best dynamic to strive for is the captain executive officer dynamic, where you're setting the tone, you're leading the relationship. Your girl is there for support. One thing I didn't touch on, but I think it's the best way to really encapsulate that is the what are we going to eat for dinner tonight argument, right? Hey, honey, what do you want to eat tonight? I don't know. What do you want to eat, right? Like it's fucking nauseating, and guys hate that. if you're the captain, you don't ask her where you're going to eat, right? You're saying, hey, I'm going to go get steak tonight. You're welcome to join me, kind of thing, right? Well, when I started applying that, I at first was like, there's no way that works. When I started applying that, what I learned was, okay, you say, hey, grab your shoes. We're going to go get steak tonight. And then if she goes, oh, I don't want steak, you go, okay, well, do you have a better suggestion? Your executive officer, right? You're going to take her, suggestion under advisement. If she has a better suggestion, there's no reason not to go with it. But most women won't. Most women will go, I don't know. I know I just don't want steak. Okay. Well, I'm getting steak. You're welcome to join me. Right. So that's how you handle that situation, because you're the fucking captain. When I started applying that, when I was out spinning plates, before I met my current girl, who I've been with going on 5 years now, it's effortless relationship. When I started applying that, every girl that I did this to, I said, hey, we're going to go do this tonight. They all said, oh, good. That sounds good. Because most women don't want to make decisions. And so if you don't care where you want to eat, which most guys are like, well, I don't care where I want to eat. Perfect. Then fucking pick a place. Just pick a place and say, hey, we're going here. And now guess what? You get to eat wherever you want, whenever you want, and it's fucking magical. And she just wants to do what you're going to do. Most women just want to join your lifestyle. Okay. We talked about alpha beta traits. So basically alpha, if you look at it neurochemically, alpha is that dopamine rush that you're giving her. You want to be, if you read Rollo's 5th book, it's called The Player's Handbook. He basically says you want to be your girl's dopamine drug dealer, right? So alpha traits are giving her that dopamine feeling. And then beta traits, that gives her the oxytocin feeling, the feeling of comfort, right? Bringing her chocolates when she's not feeling good. That Married Man Sex Life Primer book, he talks about ovulation game. That's where you secretly track your wife's cycle, because different stages in her menstrual cycle, she's going to want different things from you. When she's ovulating, she's going to want to fuck. She's going to want those alpha traits hard, right? But when she's PM, like when she's actually, on her period, she's getting cramps, she's not feeling too hot, she's going to want the beta traits. She's going to want you to bring her the ice cream and shit, right? So having that understanding is good. You don't really have to track your girl's cycle. Like I'm like, that's pretty fucking psychotic, man. But at least if you're intuitive and you pay attention to what's going on, you can intuitively sort of know what she needs in that moment if you just pay attention. We talked about the cardinal rule of relationships, which is whoever needs the other person least has all the power in the relationship. And we talked about dread game. And then I have the fucking guy with the lion here because that's alpha bro shit, right? Resources, way to connect. I have a new book out called The Essential Skills of a Masculine Presence Psychology Paradigm. It's all about rewiring your subconscious to have more of this type of mindset, right? It talks about the paradigm of thinking of your girl like she's your best friend, and why that tends to ruin relationships. Why thinking of her as your equal partner ruins relationships. That kind of stuff. I talk about it in this book. I have the Come On Man podcast. I have new episodes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday on your favorite podcast platform. I go live on YouTube for that, but then I release it later that day. And then, if you guys are having problems in your marriage or relationship and you want to talk about it, book a free call with me. If you go to call.fixeddeadbedrooms.com, we can chat and talk about your specific situation.
Thank you for listening to the Sovereign Man Podcast. If you're ready to take charge of your life and become the man you've always wanted to be, we invite you to join the movement at sovereignman.ca.